BBOR Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia. BlackBoxNed88 on Instagram for the bonus podcast. And welcome to BBOR, the home of true crime talk radio and your premier destination for unsolved mysteries, criminal psychology, and exploring the dark side of cyberspace. My name is Ned DeHaan, and I am your host, as well as the creator of AstroPsych 400 here on YouTube, and regular contributor to the Zodiac Killer channel. And a great way to support these shows is just by listening to some more content. But you can also go over to Amazon.com and have a look at the book Killer on a White Horse, written by me, Ned DeHaan. It is a novel, murder mystery, inspired by the Zodiac Manson connection, but it is indeed fictional. However, who doesn't love a good mystery? And there is always the Teespring page. Feel free to check out some of the merchandise. And remember, being weird is not a crime. Let the show begin. Okay, hello everybody. It is now the weekend. And in the past on this channel, I did something called the Anything Goes Friday segment, where any subject was fair game, but due to some time constraints, those are going to be coming out on either Fridays or Saturdays, or sometime during the weekend. Life off of the internet has done that to me, but I definitely want to keep up with all of the stories of the true crime world and share things with you guys, and responding to the questions and comments that you put in the comments section down below. Zodiac Mondays will still be happening on this channel, where I'm talking about anything related to the Zodiac Killer, and recently there have been some episodes that have been coming out called Zodiac Killer News Reports, which I love creating and interacting with you guys in the comments section, because those allow me to talk about many different subjects at once, and I can just share with you some things that I'm reading about or watching on YouTube, or just the stuff that I'm learning about the Zodiac Killer. And on the weekends, of course, doing that about a different story in the true crime world. And one final announcement is that there will be a simulcast coming out soon on AstroPsych 400, the other YouTube channel, and BlackBoxOnlineRadio. That should be recorded tomorrow, and it's something that I thought was relevant to both channels, something that was in the nature of both of the dynamics for AstroPsych 400 and BBOR, so please feel free to visit AstroPsych 400 here on YouTube, and as always, you can like and subscribe to both. But what you're looking at now is my copy of the book, The Devil's Gap, The Untold Story of Canada's First Suicide Bomber, and written by Joe Ralco. And before I say anything more, I would like to read the description that has been posted on this book, on Amazon.com. The scene, on May 10th, 1973, seemed like something out of a Hollywood blockbuster in the town of Kenora on the north shore of the Lake of Woods near the Ontario-Manitoba border. A man was robbing a bank in the most bombastic way. Paul Higgins walked into the bank armed with a homemade bomb and a dead man's switch in his mouth to detonate it. If anyone were to shoot him, he'd let go of the switch and he'd blow himself up and take as many people with him as possible. The police were in a standoff. Was it worth the risk to shoot? Acclaimed journalist Joe Ralco spent his entire life mulling over this case. It wasn't his career that put him on the trail of Paul Higgins. Joe was there. He was there as a curious high school student who watched the drama unfold from the street. He had a clear line of sight down the sidewalk as Higgins emerged from the bank 50 feet away. What happened next would go down in Canadian history. Ralco would become fascinated with every aspect of the case. It was only years later, after he had established himself as a writer and while recovering from his first battle with cancer, that he finally decided to tell the story. And if you ever do read this book, The Devil's Gap, The Untold Story of Canada's First Suicide Bomber, it is one that is not only talking about the incident, but also about just the experiences that someone would have living in Ontario. I had never heard of this town before, Kenora, Ontario, and when I was looking it up online, as it says it's on the Ontario-Manitoba border, but it is on the absolute western edge of the province of Ontario, north of Minnesota. And it's near the Lake of Woods, which is something that is in the international divide between Canada and the United States, but I remember from history class in high school that after the Lake of Woods, there's just a parallel that goes all the way across most of the U.S.-Canadian border. So there are a couple different dynamics going on in this book. The first is that it's telling the story from how Joe Ralco imagines it. It's also sharing some experiences of Canada, but it's definitely written as a nonfiction novel, creative nonfiction, so to speak, because as it said in that description there, Joe Ralco was a high school student at the time who saw some of these things taking place, but he certainly couldn't recreate the thought process of Paul Higgins the way that he did in the book, as well as recreating conversations where he wasn't present. So there are certain creative liberties that have been used in this book, and when I read nonfiction, I do not do it in a linear process. This made so much trouble for me in school because I like to read a little bit of this chapter and a little bit of that chapter. But when I was reading a book like The Devil's Gap, I found that that was somewhat valuable because, again, not everything is exactly about the incident with the bank robbery and the suicide bombing. But the 1970s was the first time that Canada had a suicide bomber. I still find that a little bit beyond belief, but if you do ever read this book, though, feel free to jump around, look at this chapter, then go a couple chapters ahead and look at that one. Because with nonfiction, most of the time you can get away with that because it's about the facts, it is about the message, and it is about the information that they're trying to convey. Sometimes you can't, though, because each chapter builds upon the previous one, but I found with this one that that method succeeded to a certain extent. And if you hear any little noises in the background, that's just me fumbling around with some of the pages. And we are also going to see, is Paul Higgins this man's true identity? Because there is a very strong theory that is suggesting that he is somebody else. Longtime BBOR listeners will know that last year on the channel I did an episode called Walk Away or Foul Play, The Disappearance of William Higgins. And there was a true crime researcher out there who actually composed a theory on how these two people could be one and the same. William Higgins was a man who disappeared on April 1st of 1969, and as you can understand from the title of that episode, Walk Away or Foul Play, did he walk away and start a new life? Or if you listen to that episode, which I have on this channel, two of them actually, you can look at another possible theory about how William Higgins was murdered by a man who was trying to steal his wife, more or less, and he has never been found, so we aren't sure what happened. We aren't sure which theory is correct. The other episode that I have talking about William Higgins is one of the Zodiac Killer ones, and it's called Zodiac Killer, the Voice Print Article, because I was contacted by the son of William Higgins named Bruce, and he is the one who provided me with this book and shared that theory with me. And the first half of that episode, Zodiac Killer, the Voice Print Article, talks about a magazine article that had been written in 1972 about the Zodiac Killer, and because Bruce was the first person who ever asked me if I would talk about a family member who had gone missing, I, of course, agreed to do that, and I devoted the second half of that episode to the disappearance of William Higgins, and then I did a standalone episode, and now you're going to hear some more things about this possible connection in this one here on The Devil's Gap. And in this book, though, that is written by Joe Ralco, there are a lot of transcriptions of radio broadcasts and news reports. I hope I'm using that term correctly, because these are things that should have been said on the radio back in the 1970s in Canada. And I'll read one here from page 69. The Kenora police are inside the Bank of Commerce on Main Street with the hold-up man. We're told he is heavily armed, and he has threatened to blow up the bank with dynamite if he doesn't get what he wants. All the customers and staff were released. Bank manager Al Reed apparently is the only person inside the bank with the hold-up man. People are starting to assemble on the sidewalks along both sides of Main Street, which is where the Trans-Canada Highway goes through our town. The police have not yet stopped traffic. And as you heard from the Amazon description, this guy, Paul Higgins, is the name of the robber, and he has something that is called a dead man switch. Now, this bomb seems rather makeshift, but it's using dynamite, more or less, And he has the dead man switch in his mouth, as you heard it previously, but it's also something that he can move around, because on page 89 of the book it talks about how he moves the switch from his mouth to his hand, but he still has it in firm control. And Paul Higgins also committed this robbery with a high-powered rifle. And as I was reading the book, The Devil's Gap, I was really wondering, how is this plan going to go down? How would people respond to him robbing the bank? And some people are even saying this in on the radio, like as I said, the transcriptions of the radio, like, why on earth is he robbing a bank in Kenora, Ontario? And I think by that they mean, wouldn't he be able to find a bank that probably would have had more money in it somewhere else? But I remember back when my small town in West Virginia got robbed, the one that I lived in as a kid anyway, and there was a story about how somebody had robbed the local bank. I think inside the town limits, we only had one bank at the time, and somebody had walked in wearing a white ski mask. They said that he was in and out in under a minute, and he took $1 million with him. I mean, so they said. I have no idea if any of those numbers are accurate. We were doing those crappy American standardized tests at the time, and then we just kept hearing these helicopters flying by, and then they did a little bit of an announcement where teachers had to tell us what was going on, so people are encouraged not to walk down certain streets and so on because there had been a bank robbery. But people do things like that. They'll target the banks in small towns because they think they can make a clean getaway. But you really have to wonder about the motive of Paul Higgins, because he could have just walked in there with the rifle, and the manager even says, "Boy, that's a high-powered rifle you got there," and then says Higgins didn't reply. He stepped back and leaned the rifle against the counter, taking care to keep himself between the skin and the weapon. So you have to question the thought process. And there's no way you can know if you're going to be able to pull off a bank robbery flawlessly. I told you that guy in the white ski mask here in West Virginia went in and out in under a minute and took an enormous amount of money. Well, Paul Higgins, the bank robber in this case, encountered something very problematic because there were security measures, and they reset codes to the safes every month. And I'll just read that little segment here. "We changed the right-hand lock combination on the first of each month, and I honestly can't remember it," the bank manager said. "I'll have to phone someone to get both it and the other combination." So part of me was wondering, is that bank manager just messing with him and trying to stall time when I was reading that? But again, that's a real security measure that would stall somebody out. I mean, that would slow somebody down, whether it's true or false. But the long story short is Paul Higgins is able to obtain the cash. And I would like to go to page 95 in the book and read another one of those radio reports. "Traffic on the Trans-Canada Highway through Kenora is still at a standstill because of an attempted bank robbery. The main street of this northwestern Ontario town, 120 miles east of Winnipeg, has been blocked off by the police. They did that after confirming a lone robber walked into the Canadian Imperial Bank of Commerce armed with 6 sticks of dynamite. We don't know if negotiations are underway. We can see the north and south ends of Main Street, which have been blocked by Kenora and Ontario Provincial Police cruisers. So far, the mayor and the Kenora police chief have been unavailable for comment. Meanwhile, hundreds of people are streaming to the downtown area to watch the spectacle unfold. This is John Barry in Kenora." John Barry, of course, is a reporter. But even with the security measures in place, Paul Higgins is still able to get the money, and he also was able to come out of the bank. And as I said, he's armed and dangerous. And I would like to go to the next report that is on page 118. There's a helicopter overhead at this point. The man is coming out. He has a black stocking on his head. He is carrying a clothes peg in his mouth. That's what it's called, a clothes peg. Maybe they mean like clothespin or something, but that's the dead man switch that we've talked about previously. He is moving back into the bank now. He's got 3 duffel bags, and 3 duffel bags apparently full of money. He has moved back with a man, and they're waiting to see what happens. The helicopter did fly past as the man walked out. Whether he was frightened off, he moved back in, and they're coming back out again. And to get to the heart of the issue one more time, eventually, Paul Higgins becomes separated from this other man, whom we can only understand to be the bank manager. He was the only person in the bank with Paul Higgins, and he is standing by himself outside the bank. And even though he has the bomb, I was beginning to wonder just as I was reading this, are they going to shoot him or not? I mean, if he doesn't have the hostage and he has committed the bank robbery and the police have a clear shot at him, bomb or no bomb, are they going to take their chances and fire a gunshot? I mean, we can tell how the book is going to end because it's in the title, The Devil's Gap, The Untold Story of Canada's First Suicide Bomber. But I was like, are they going to risk it all and shoot him? I mean, how do they know how powerful this bomb is, or what are going to be the consequences? So I give credit to Joe Ralco for building up some of the suspense there, but yes, indeed, they took a shot because someone had a clear opportunity to do so, and then after being shot, Paul Higgins detonated the bomb, or as you heard there, the 6 sticks of dynamite, and there was an explosion. And then, I mean, this part of the book I thought was perhaps the most awkward, where after this guy has blown himself up and he has these duffel bags with money and the bills are going everywhere, 6 people just started trying to collect the bills saying, free money! Never mind that there has just been an explosion that killed a bank robber and blood and guts probably were around a little bit, I would imagine. But they're just like, okay, free money. I guess it's an opportunity. That part of the book I thought was pretty weird. All right. I said that I would talk about a suspect who may actually be the real-life Paul Higgins, and his name is William Higgins, who was commonly known as Bill, who lived in the state of Pennsylvania, and then just either walked away from his life in that state, and then went on to do who knows what. There are a couple of theories about the disappearance of Paul Higgins. As I said, one of them is that he was murdered. Another one that I talked about in the episode I did on him was that there was a rumor that William Higgins actually left the state of Pennsylvania and went down to Florida to live on international waters, like living on a boat and then only occasionally coming to shore, but keeping the boat in international waters mostly. So people are just uncertain. We are uncertain as to what actually happened. But I've been corresponding with the son of William Higgins, Bruce, who uses the YouTube handle BH, and he has given me some of the reasons why this true crime researcher, who was not him, this was a different person who had contacted him thinking that there could be a link between the Canadian suicide bomber Paul Higgins and Bill Higgins. The first is, why choose the name Paul? Well, it turns out that Bruce's uncle was named Paul. Bill Higgins had a brother-in-law named Paul, and he was very close to him. And I was even wondering, lad, like, how actually are we going to establish this connection? All right, these guys have the same last name, but I grew up watching America's Most Wanted, right? And in my spare time, I wouldn't go out and like make friends or anything. I would sit around on the internet reading about true crime, but well before YouTube. So I would just get on America's Most Wanted. I would read about criminals. Then I would go over to the FBI website and I would look at the wanted posters and so on with just absolute fascination and enthrallment, just wondering, are they going to catch these people? And I would notice that almost every person who had been featured on the FBI website had a possible alias. And they showed that many people use a different last name, but they keep their first name. However, this is quite different because this person is using a different first name, but keeping the last name. Last names are much more useful for identifying somebody. I mean, if I am Ned DeHaan and then I start going by Ted DeHaan, that isn't going to be very practical. But when it comes to this guy here, Bill Higgins. I mean, the fact that he had a brother-in-law named Paul, whom he was very close to, that is something. I mean, that is something. And just to throw in a side note about people using aliases, I always thought it was so weird that somebody would alter their last name but keep the first name. Let's say if John Smith is on the run, maybe using the alias John Jones or John Johnson or John Warbucks or something like that. And I would always wonder that. Why would they keep any fragment of their name at all? Why wouldn't they adopt something completely different? Let's say, for example, if John Smith goes on the run, well, why doesn't he change his name to Devin Foster or something like that? Something that is absolutely different. And then as I got a little bit older, I began to think, okay, well, it must be because he wants to always be able to respond to his first name, never have any type of slip up. And if you ever get a chance to watch the movie Stepfather, which I believe the full title is like Make Way for Stepfather, but there are three movies like in the Stepfather trilogy. The first two feature the actor Terry O'Quinn. It's all about that exact concept about not making sure that someone is responding to the correct name while they're living a fake life. Okay, but with William Higgins, I mean, did he actually walk away from his life in Pennsylvania and go on to become the Canadian suicide bomber Paul Higgins? There are other pieces of evidence, and that is that Paul Higgins spent a lot of time in the town of Kenora, and he didn't seem like he was Canadian. He wasn't familiar with the local area. People didn't recognize him. He was definitely an out-of-towner, and he also drank American beer, particularly the brand Iron City. Now, this is something that Bruce wanted to zone in on a lot. He said his father, his father, Bill Higgins, William Higgins, only drank Iron City beer. That was, well, I was going to call it his preferred beer, but in our correspondences, Bruce highlighted that it was the only beer that he drank. And he also smoked cigars, and Bill Higgins smoked cigars, and he had a 22 caliber pistol, and Bill Higgins had a 22 caliber pistol as well. So there actually is a little bit of evidence, and I just had to ask Bruce flat out, and I did this yesterday. How likely do you think it is that your father actually went on to become the suicide bomber that we've heard about in the beginning of this episode and that is featured in the book The Devil's Gap? And he said about a 70% chance. So there are some reasons to think about that. But the cons going against the possibility of William Higgins being the suicide bomber is that he was balding and Bill Higgins was not. He had a red beard, and then that was something that was also abnormal for William Higgins. He wore a fedora and he had an accent, but this is a notation that was written by Bruce and it says question mark. In the beginning parts of the book, they talk about this guy, Paul Higgins. And again, if this stuff is all accurate and this isn't a fictionalization that was created by Joe Ralco, people met this guy, Paul Higgins, around town in Ontario. And somebody thought that he was Dutch. They could tell that he wasn't a local to the area. He seemed like a foreigner, but someone actually thought he had a Dutch accent. And I can't even begin to imitate a Dutch accent right now. I don't know if I can do that. That could be a challenge question for you. Can you do a Dutch accent? And what Paul Higgins said back to this person, sometimes I get mistaken for being German, or I think he says sometimes people think that I'm German. I don't want to misquote him, because there's a difference between being mistaken and sometimes people think I'm German. I think it's actually closer to the second one. As I've said very clearly so far, William Higgins was not Dutch, he was not German, he was not a European, he was from the state of Pennsylvania. He worked as a laborer and steel worker. He had 6 children, if I recall correctly, and he was 36 years old at the time of his disappearance, born in 1933, and he disappeared on May 1st of 1969, but there's nothing about him that I've encountered spending time in Europe. Okay, German accent, Dutch accent. I'm American, and I am not Canadian. And I went to Canada in 2018. That was the most recent time I've been there. I've actually been to Canada about 4 or 5 times, and I was in Quebec and Montreal. And I went into a Subway shop, like the Subway sandwich shop, but in Quebec. And I was talking to the cashier who worked there. First, she had addressed me or something, and she said something like, and I was like, oh, I'm sorry, I don't speak French. And she's like, oh, why not? Are you German? You sound like you're German. I was like, no, I'm not German. I'm American. I'm from West Virginia. And what she was actually trying to tell me was that they no longer use pennies in Canada because they're too expensive to make. And I was like, oh, I guess that's what that French thing was she said at the beginning. However, the point is, I am not German. I am not Dutch. But she thought that I was German for some reason, I guess. And his part of Pennsylvania isn't too far from my part of West Virginia. It's about a 3-hour drive. Things like that do happen. And even though someone isn't actually from that particular country, they might have what that person thinks the accent sounds like going on. And that's exactly it. I mean, that's exactly it. People can make mistakes. I don't know, has this ever happened to you when you've been talking to somebody? Do you think they're from one country and then it turns out they're from another? Like I used to have this job where I had to make phone calls, and I was talking to somebody and I thought that they were Russian, but then it turns out they were Indonesian. Like I was like, how could I be that far off? I mean, sometimes people have an accent that you just can't place. And I definitely have encountered that not only in Canada, but like say I go to a different part of the country, or I just even go to another country itself. People think that I'm from somewhere else, so people can make mistakes. But that is just a fact all the same, that somebody thought that he sounded like a European, Paul Higgins, yet William Higgins was from Pennsylvania. And if anybody has any personal experiences about that, I would love to read your comments down below. Has anybody ever thought that you were from a different part of the country, or a different country altogether? Or have you ever had an experience where you were talking to somebody and then it turned out that they were from a different part of the world than you expected? You can share your experiences in the comments section down below. And this last thing is going to sound really weird, and I don't mean to say this in an insensitive way, but if you ever watched the Cleveland show, like, done by Seth MacFarlane, and Mike Henry voiced Cleveland Brown at the time, and there was this character named Tim the Bear. He's a talking bear, and he kind of sounded like this. Like, and someone was just talking to me like that on the phone. Like, I called customer service once, and then they were asking me, like all these kinds of things, and they had no idea, like where I possibly was, and no concept of American geography. Oh, we don't service that location. And I was like, hi, where are you calling me from? I was like, and they said, I am in the state of Georgia. And I was just like, you're from Georgia? Like, is English your first language? Yes, the only language that I know. And very, very unusual voice. I don't know if that customer service rep was just having a laugh and trying to be a cartoon or something. But that was another example of how some people just have unusual voices. I have an unusual voice, and from time to time, people in West Virginia think I'm a foreigner. But also, on a serious note, in the notation that has been written by Bruce, there was never any kind of cross DNA testing done between William Higgins and Paul Higgins. And do you think that that is a reasonable observation or not, that Paul Higgins changed his first name from William to Bill? Is that something that you think a criminal would normally do, or would they normally change the last name? And yes, indeed, Paul Higgins was a criminal, but like, do you think that someone would be more likely to change the surname because it would prevent them from being tracked down, caught, or identified? Or is this just simply the early 1970s and the late 1960s, and people weren't paying that much attention? And just to share some follow-up notes about the disappearance of William Higgins, as I said, he disappeared on May 1st of 1969, and I was listening back to the older episode that I did, and Mike, I got ahead of myself. Bill Higgins' wife was having an affair with a guy named Mike, and he was much younger than Bill, and according to his son Bruce, Bill Higgins knew about the affair. He could even see his wife getting into a car with Mike. He just did absolutely nothing, even to the point where it was shockingly nonchalant. He had like no visible response about his wife going on with some other guy. He knew that it was going on. So, does that suggest that this could have been a walk away, or does that suggest that this could have been a murder? Because in the previous episodes that I did about the disappearance of William Higgins, I was definitely leaning toward one of those two possibilities. Is this just some guy who is working long hours, and then he would come home on his lunch break, which he did regularly for 1 hour, and when he went missing, he actually came home for the lunch hour, and then he left, and then never came back? And does that not suggest that this was a walkaway? Some other details that I shared in that episode. He left behind his final paycheck. His social security number was never used in the United States of America. His truck, which was a blue pickup, and if you've been looking at the missing persons poster, perhaps you can see the blue truck there. That is not the actual truck that was owned by William Higgins. It was a recreation. I mean, it's a similar truck that he would have driven. And in the episode, which I hope you will listen to, on William Higgins, there was a theory put forward by Bruce that he was actually murdered by Mike, who would go on to be his stepfather, the man that his mother was having the affair with, and that he submerged the truck into water, into a nearby water source, and that if they were to actually search that area with divers, then they would find the truck owned by Bill Higgins. So I don't know. I mean, I'm completely uncertain on this one. I think that the Iron City beers, though, is the biggest connection that Bill Higgins would have to being the Paul Higgins here in the book who detonated the bomb and killed himself in Canada in the early 1970s. But what do you think? And if you'd like to hear more about the disappearance of William Higgins, I heavily, heavily encourage you to listen to the 2 episodes that I have here on this channel, Zodiac Killer, the voice print article, and Walk Away or Foul Play, the disappearance of William Higgins. And then the book is called The Devil's Gap, the Untold Story of Canada's First Suicide Bomber. And please look out for that future episode on Astro Psych 400, as well as that's going to be coming out later on here on this channel, and I invite you to check out all the other content on Astro Psych 400, as well as some future things that will be coming out on the Zodiac Killer channel. So lots of stuff here on YouTube talking about the true crime world, as well as criminal psychology, everything under the sun and in the darkness. Anybody can write the show at BlackBoxOnlineRadio at AOL.com. You can also get me on Facebook. My personal Facebook is in the description box, and there is also a Facebook page for the show, Black Box Online Radio. And then you can also find me on Instagram at BlackBoxNid88, and I will see you over there for the bonus pod.